good afternoon, and most welcome to 1013. I will continue with the book of Richard E. Lind for a while here, and I have the chance to ponder about what I read previously, and I would like to point to this heart consciousness so you don't stray in the wrong path when you think about what is heart consciousness. That it is an inclusive thinking, more of everything, because the initiation process that brings the adolescents to maturity will take in both sides, both the consciousness and the unconscious. Thereby it will be more of the both, because otherwise we will strand into the normal problem, which I recognize a lot. I always made that mistake, and that we think about the other thinking as intuition, instinct, spontaneous, and so forth. It is better to think of it as sharp, stepwise, distinct, and clear. That is the heart consciousness. Because what happens when we separate the unconscious and the conscious is that we get ruled by the unconscious. The unconscious takes a role in our lives it shouldn't have. It has a role, but it should not have the dominating role. And this could be seen in parallel with Ian McGilchrist. I was especially thinking of The Master and His Emissary, where the emissary took over unbeknownst to ourselves. And the left hemisphere has some of these characteristics of the takeover. I wouldn't make a complete equalization between left hemisphere and reflective consciousness. Rather, it is the actual takeover that is close to the left hemisphere, that it works unconsciously to take over. It was not a decided move. It was caused by a degeneration, as Richard E. Lind points out, and it's also harmful. So intuition can lead us astray, and especially astray it's somebody I met once upon a time in Japan, Mike Cross, an Englishman who went there to further his interest and understanding of Kigen Dogen, and he learned the language, and then he also learned Chinese, and he learned ancient language. He was a very scholarly person when I met him, and he actually translated one of the works of Kigen Dogen, the Shobo Genzo, to English, with all the signs that were important were noted. But he was led astray according to himself. I read his homepage. He did not understand what the heart consciousness was, and he spent 20 years trying in the wrong direction, so to speak. And he discovered it when he actually visited Alexander teacher, who showed him the correct relationship between head and neck, and all of a sudden his thinking changed, and he had a sort of an epiphany. Oddly enough, in this case, he attacked with a vengeance his master, Gudo Nishijima, who was a very kind and loving person. I don't think Gudo Nishijima was aware of that our consciousness is different. How could he know that? So I think his mistake was an honest one. Let's try to sort of, no, I broke the back of this poor book. let us sort of draw in, sketch out what it could be about. Some of this reference, I think, might send off thinking into this direction, but now you've been warned, so I don't think it should be a problem. I found a quote here on page 198. The ancient soul, a term referred to a fundamental identity with an originative internal spiritual depth and meaning, was experienced everywhere in the animate and even inanimate realms. The thought of ancient individuals was soulful and physical. That is primarily pre-verbal, intuitive and animistic. Look out. Because it was experienced, at least in part, in and through the body as a whole, with all of its internal and external senses, and through an experiential sympathy and intuitive compassion founded upon the imagined, if not actual, consciousness of a common origin and a source of presence. That's good. E.g., a tactile and affective sharing of perspectives and a common sense of origination within the world soul, from which all beings and objects in the world emerge, within which they existed in both a physical and spiritual sense, and to which they returned. After death, this subtle, transparent sense of presence may have been all that was left for the dead, unless they regressed into a dream state. I found this book, Language of the Body, by Sarah Taube, and it has an interesting quotation about something that I struggled many years with, and there were the so-called onomatopoetic words. Japanese has 20% of their vocabulary in onomatopoeia. I'll write that out because it's tough enough just to hear me say it. It literally means imitating sounds. And here are expressions for what we call in English weeping. To cry is wah-wah, to weep is meso-meso, to sob is ksun-ksun, to blubber is oi-oi, to whimper is skit-skit, to howl is one-one, to pule is he-he, and to mew is n-n. The latest one I don't even understand. How could that be mew? But it goes much beyond that. Heaviness does have an onomatopoeia, and how does that sound? I think in Japanese it has a sound because it is something they can communicate, and they can even make up new onomatopoeia if they want to at some instances. One was a heavy bell. Ban was a lighter bell. And I think this is closer to the tactile sensation, the sensory ground stuff. And it is very important in this process in adolescence that consciousness is sort of divided and unconscious is divided, instead of this blunt division to say that all of the body is unconscious and everything that is up the head is conscious. There it starts. That is the main problem. I think it was really well put. It brings an understanding. And by not having initiation processes and a guidance of a tradition, I would say as well, but of course also a guide who has gone through this and been able to integrate the both different sides, unconscious and conscious, into a whole system. That, I would say, is the point where problem starts. And especially, I get the association already before. We have these yoga books here. We're going to study yoga course this summer. But here we have some yoga books, and do remember, yoga is a spiritual practice, whereas in the West we see the body as made of flesh, being unconscious, and I think that division is wrongly put. Should be a division, as I mentioned before, between dorsal and ventral. That is actually the ha and the ta of yoga, the yin and the yang of Eastern tradition. But whereas the division between soul and body, like we put it in, the incisions, cut, that is not a normal cut. It doesn't make any sense. And to ask the question, why is the cut made there, is going to make it even worse. I can sort of think about the division between arm and body, or trunk. Put here, it will hinder you in your movement here, because your arm starts in the shoulder. And we know, if you have that idea that the arm begins here, you will try to use it that way. And it's not the correct way. And the same will of course be, as Richard Ealing pointed out, you make a division in the wrong place, and that place doesn't make any sense. Trying to understand that incision, that division, will make the thing much worse. And I would say one of the culprits in doing this are maybe the non-dualistic Society of America, where they try to put soul and body together, which of course makes the whole thing much worse. It has to be understood as a random cut, not as a just cut, although unjustified, which is different. Bringing the two together won't heal us, because the cut was made by an accident, as Richard Ealing indicates. And this have been my view for quite some while. I've been saying it's a random cut. It's caused by happenstance. It was never hypothesized. This we know from, for instance, Paul Feyerabend, another good book that is mainly treating the same subject, Conquest of Abundance. Look, these are all my coffee spots. I've been reading these books 4 or 5 years ago. The division, wow, look at that. Synchronicity turning up here. I had no memory of that. Look at that. It's a fractal in the book.
Fractal copy.
Well, let's see this as a sign from the gods. This is in context with Bruno Lesky, giving an objective account. This is from page 120 of the book, Conquest of Abundance by Paul Feyerabend. Wow, interesting. It starts like this. I read the book, so I can help you out here to put it into context. Giving an objective account means that people are approached or projected. Projected means as the Brunelleschi thing, project an image to a canvas in a special way. Like Brunelleschi, behaviorists set up a stage containing subjects, researchers, experimental equipment, and possible descriptions. These possible descriptions in parentheses are already made. It's important to understand. Made before. They project their subjects, call the projected aspects facts, and identify them with a stage-independent reality. What does stage-independent reality means? Well, they set up a stage, that's in the past. Once they get the fact extracted, like you make juice in a machine, taking oranges, you can sort of project it to a generality and say it's of the world. And all of a sudden, you forgot that it was actually set in a specific stage. This is a going from, Miss Feyerabend. This is going from something that is dependent on a specific stage. I show it like this, specific circumstances like this, and then all of a sudden there is a cloud, and all of a sudden it's no longer part of the stage, it's just a fact. That's the problem, what happens in between here. And then you have this loose bit. It is like having a piece of a puzzle, but you don't know from what puzzle, and you have millions of them in a big storage. Piece of puzzle here. How do you use it? You can't, I'd say. You can use it to some. You can still say it's a piece of puzzle, but this is obfuscating, it's hiding and introducing randomness into the perspective. But the very presence of a stage and of methods of projection through doubt on the identification. After all, a different stage, tradition, such as common sense, with its reliance on empathy and introspection, produces different aspects leading to different ways of explaining and reacting to human behavior. So why should one type of aspect be regarded as real, while another receives no such dignity? Remember this, because we have a tendency to lift something out of its stage. Think about the fern once more, and I think this is how it's supposed to be understood here.
Which one? This one?
The fern.
Okay.
The ordbunke.
Nice. Oh.
It is very important that you go down in the level. We don't seem to have that direction, and that direction is also covered here, obfuscated. If you go down in the iteration, you will see a repetition, but it's not exactly the same. And this is having a connection to timing, because this is how time develops. You do it in a certain sequence. And since reality is fractal, every instance is a fractality you go down into. It is not flat. And this is how flattening out looks like. it's a sort of an obfuscation. It's a sort of hiding what the product is and where it comes from. It's a bit like having a factory that produces something, and when you buy it they say, well, this could be food. This is exactly the same. You don't know what it is. It's not very helpful if you go and buy something there and you're going to stay somewhere for a week and you need food, and then you buy this product and say it could be food. And I think this obfuscation, of course, has been made much worse with the internet. It didn't have to. If we had our stage relation clear and we could sort of mark everything in which specific stage was this arranged from the beginning, then the puzzle would have the piece of puzzle will have its origin, and you would know that origin, and thereby, even if it was complicated, you could find the original puzzle and put it together. Here, you cannot do that. It's an obfuscation. It's not clear. And calling something a fact, it is really, really bad. Really bad. I think I mentioned that more intuitively before, that facts are something to look out for. Be careful with those. Because if you don't know in what circumstances they origin, you don't know what they are. And fact is actually such a clumsy and horrible expression. I would say it's related to truth. Both are no good to understand anything. Degenerated words, in a way, to use with real carefulness. Might be the Edward de Bono cite that truth is a function could be good. What he means by that, truth come up in a certain circumstance where you set up a stage, and then you have a byproduct called truth, and it could be only understood in that context. So for, in that way, truth does work, but it's seldom used that way these days. It's used in an incredibly sloppy way, and especially in media. Say this is true. Well, what use is to me? I don't know which circumstances it is true. I don't know the why of the truth. They just say true. It's just like saying something. This is something. What does it add? If you ask me, what is this? You've never seen this. You're from, for instance, the Amazon basin. And you ask me, what is it? It's a thing. Well, what is a thing? It's something you use. And what is that? It's a thing. There is a good expression in Swedish, goddag yxskaft. And it's a well-known reply to a stupid question. Good morning, head of X, or shaft of X. It's a confusion. Let's continue a little bit later on. I put in another marker. I just started with this. The orange ones are the most important. But it could actually be important to read one of those less important. The thoughts of the heart may have been very different from modern thoughts. This is difficult. The latter being essentially abstract. A language-based conceptuality, while the former was embodied and animistic. This is according to Lopez Austin. I think we should look out for that description, but still use it, because how do they know? It will be according to themselves, what they think to be within themselves embodied and animistic. This is probably, as I showed earlier, instinct or intuition. But disregarding that, it's still very interesting. Animistic thought may have been, for the most part, an evocation and sympathetic, e.g., compassionate recognition by an immanent soul of the vital essence of whatever was being contemplated. In fact, for one with breadth of heart, the entire world was invited into its sacred space. It is in this sense the dead may also have been animated and illuminated by the creative imagination of the radiant heart, which may very well have been thought to provide a life, space, warmth, vitality, and even a world for the sojourn of ancestors on the way to a type of transcendence, an existence independent of the living, or rebirth in an embryo, or in the heart soul, spiritual rebirth of a descendant. What survived probably over the lengthy period of time was a form or forms of consciousness that had previously been more or less identity of one's ancestor, and that they passed on but continue to inhabit in some way as part of its mature present or previous manifestation, as long as the lineage identity remained intact and continued to be passed on from generation to generation. Ancestors, the past, and I will to that like to add also the Heideggerian neologism of Geschichte. And I'd say Geschichte is where knowledge abide. That's the only place of knowledge. And when we are in this reflective consciousness, we have a lack of permanence. We are constantly new. And why are we that? This is because we're blocking out. We're blocking out awareness. And for every time we do that, it's a sort of a cut. Cut, 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 cut. Like a scissor cutting experience. This can be compared to mice where they have removed the frontal cortex and it knows the way of the maze. It's an experiment I saw in neurology a couple of years ago. And it starts to go the right way and then it stops and then it starts over, but it starts over in the place it is. So it doesn't know the place of origin anymore. And therefore it would be very hard for the mice to find its way out to the maze. It's very interesting. And I think we are doing the same. We are constantly starting over again in our thinking process, in where we are situated in the spatial realm of thinking. We don't know where we left off. Like we read a book and we don't know where we stopped. The next night we start somewhere else. This is what is happening now. And this is lack of permanence. Exactly the same thing that mouse said. Because cutting off the frontal cortex is cutting off awareness. And awareness, it's not something mysterious for a neurologist. Awareness is to know where you start and know where you're going. And unaware is starting all over again all the time. That's a pretty sharp definition. I would say they're much sharper than the definitions you find within, for instance, philosophy of consciousness. So we could be helped by looking into neurology, giving a bit more of a sharpness to the definitions. And that also goes for consistency. I think the model of the mice looking their way into the maze is so good. I'm going to put it up here. Try to write a maze. Not easy. I think the maze is going to be too easy, and no, I succeed here. That wasn't so bad. let's see. Wow, it's not that bad actually. Very bad. So the mice enters here, and this mice had his frontal cortex removed, or at least stirred. And he goes in. It knows its way, because that is knowledge. That's another part of the brain. But he doesn't know where he's left off. That's the next thinking is here. He still go back to this place or another place. And therefore, the knowledge cannot be put together in a proper sequence. And next time he thinks here, and then he starts like he was here. So you see, knowledge needs to be organized in a particular way. That is very important. And what did that other illustration I showed you do, this stage independent? Well, it does do the same thing, not by hurting our frontal cortex, but hurting knowledge itself. You don't know where you left off. You don't know where in the maze you are. If we change the maze to our reality, a stage independent fact could look like something 15 BC, and then you don't know anything else. How do you use that knowledge? Well, you can't. But by using it, you'll get confused. So it goes from being neutral, neither poisonous, neither good for you, that by using it becomes really bad. So you can refrain from using the idea of facts and truths, and you'll be well off. I think this is a very good example of what awareness literally is. Losing your way. Don't know where you left off. Like having a book on your night table. So every time you come back to have a nice read after a long day, you start like happenstance. You take a page here and you start there. The reading of the book will be suffering, and the story that develops in the book won't be there in the same way. This is what knowledge is doing. This is the incorrectness Paul Feyerabend was pointing to. And I would call that consistency, because you have both width and you have depth. So our maze is multi-level. You don't know where in your maze you are, but our maze has many different levels. And by having a monosemic take on reality, you don't know on which level the maze is presently, or your knowledge of the maze is. So you have a double problem, or you could square the problem to make it twice as big, or many times as big. And I would call that consistency. Spiritual, I think we can give like a neurological, sorry to being so scientific today, but I think it's a good start, and then we could be more flummiga the next time.
Poetic.
Yeah, spiritual. Let's give that a neurological term. I would say spiritual is having a very long-term knowledge that both tells the level, tells where in the maze, but also do that for a very long sequence, not a short sequence. What do I mean by that? Well, we know today our sequences are very short, and that is because we don't have permanence. We start over, we start over, we start over. It's no use talking about a spiritual path if every moment is new. Spiritual path must take longer time. And somewhere in your system, you have this lack. We talk about that a lot. Derrida points it out to Rodolphe Gachet. It's a lack that makes us want to go to the metaphysics of presence, to get support and help and comfort and misericordia and all that. This is the God we turn to these days, not a proper God. The reason for that is we feel with our old system there is a complete lack. Because if we don't have permanence and consistency, our plans is going to be new all the time. Our thinking is going to be new, And it can't be anything in existence that informs us over time. All information is a little bit like instant coffee. They are just for the moment. That makes them very small and very shallow. And of course, what's the meaning of talking about spiritual if it's only about 5 seconds? It's a bit similar to going to buy frozen food and you speak about gourmet food. There is nothing of gourmet food in frozen food. It might fill you up one day when you're really hungry, but it's not gourmet food. And of course, a reality or a life that is constantly repeating itself by cutting off, cutting off, cutting off, cutting off, cutting off new information, a way of being I think our old society has adapted to, especially the educational system, which today doesn't show any permanence. And why do I mean that? What do I mean by that? Well, remember, the mice or the mouse, it still has its knowledge, but it cannot put the knowledge into the right sync. But that's another aspect. Where is the knowledge situated? How does the mice know about the maze? It knows the maze because it's done the maze before. The knowledge is, so to speak, in the past, in retention. And metaphysics of presence doesn't give us access to the past. It's like the worship of now. And when we don't reach into the past, we will have a double or triple effect by now. We won't even have the knowledge of how the maze is done, because that is in the past, in the absence. We use up absence. We use absence as a definition for the presence of now. We say presence of now is what is not absence, and then we push absence away, and we can stay with this existence and this presence. That's a sort of a parasitic way of doing the whole thing, or cannibalistic. We use the little we have, and we divide that even once more to have a precious part that we say this is the good thing and the rest is like to show off. But what we do is actually we threw the baby out with the bathwater. The baby is in, half the baby at least. And this is the process Paul Feyerabend is talking about. And this is abundance gets captured. All the details, all aesthetics, all the depth of reality gets destroyed or eaten up by this tendency. And it took me a while to understand this last bit, how it works. But now we sort of we found the cure at the same time as we found the problem, so to speak. The cure is, of course, deconstruction and the widening of this deconstruction with fractality. But we also found out what is the problems. Went back to Paul Feyerabend after all these years. And oddly enough, for some mad reason, Kalle borrowed the book the same day I thought about it. The very same book with my coffee stains. And here you see the knowledge that was in the book plays a role. It helped us find the way in the maze. Retention is not something unimportant. Although if you read Henri Bergson, retention is not a big part. I don't think he literally mean that. I think retention is immensely important, not only retention. Because without everything that we've done, the past is the only source of knowledge. Without going through the maze, the mice wouldn't, or the mouse wouldn't know anything. The past is the only source of knowledge. And we're pushing that away. And we're also pushing away the future. But today I want to put a praise into the retention, that it's absolutely important with the past, because there is literally no other way of getting knowledge. That's it. You can't sit by yourself, as it's indicated. It's like this holy place, metaphysics of presence, and it promises, when you come to this, finally arrive in the glory of the metaphysics of presence, you will be able to make up whatever knowledge you want. And I'd say you can already do that, but that won't be knowledge. It's making up your own stuff. And that stuff doesn't have any value on the universal coin market. It's like bitcoins of your own making. And the internal market won't even accept them, because the internal market is not completely shut off from the external market. So there is a problem here, and I think he's pointing to that. There is a disruption in adolescence. Could be the explanation part, and I do agree with that. When I went to India, I saw so many initiation processes. They are very important. And there is one in the coming of adolescence, and there is one in mid, and there is one at the very end. And the coming of adolescence was one weird one, where they drank rice and water. And that I will never forget. The second one was quite painful. I won't forget that either. But those has been integrated into the Christian church of southern India, at least. And that goes to show these are important things. But it's also a problem here, I would say, to add something, if I'm allowed, dear Richard Lind. And it's our pushing away of our knowledge of the maze. Because not only do we do, as Paul Feyerabend suggested, we sort of take things out of the context, and now we don't put an address note to tell which context this function truth is coming from, thereby making the function truth unusable. So we lose actually truth as well. We can have truth, according to Paul Feyerabend, if we know the circumstance, but it's not stage independent. Why would it be stage independent? Doesn't make any sense. Well, it shouldn't make any sense, because it wasn't a conscious decision. None of the philosophers suggested this. This is something they unconsciously had within themselves already when they started philosophy. It has never been proposed as an hypothesis or something that we should live by. And that is the problematic thing. If at least the division was thought of, it would have some reason to it. But the very unreasonably makes it impossible to ask why. It's like if I hold this in my hand and I all of a sudden drop it, and you will ask me, why did you put it right there? Well, I dropped it. Why did you put it right there? The question will imply that I had some magic force, so that I can tell where it was supposed to go. And the same goes for asking too much why there is a division, where the division is. That is a problem in itself. The cutting line within the society of non-dualism is often emphasized as they give even body is like meaty, heavy, muscular. Well, they don't even have to put that. I know that before I went into, but this is going to be amplified. And if the division is random, this would sort of give the indication it wasn't random. There were at least some properties, but there were none. And that is the point of Richard E. Lind. That's my point as well. So by asking, why was the cut done there? It doesn't help. And if you have this established as an existence, and then you have the other part established as an existence, let's call the other part abstract, as was suggested one of the quotes there. Abstract, airy, non located, and so forth. That plus this in the society of non-dualism solves the problem. No, it won't. Because once more, you are strengthening the idea that there should be, the division had some purpose to it, and it's a possible division to make somewhere in this line. There are divisions in reality. Dorso ventral is one of those, but this is not it's random. It was never ever thought of. None of the pre-Socrates, none of the post-Socrates, none has suggested this division. It was just there, and it was just there in Western tradition. No other. And that's part of the problem. Yes?
Yeah, yesterday you mentioned Stephen Feynman. What is about the space as a geometric, that the space originated in geometry? Stephen Feynman, what was his name? You mentioned Stephen Feynman yesterday. Space and geometry.
Stephen?
Feynman. Geometry and space. Space is geometric. Room is geometry.
Well, I don't know what lecture that was, but I was talking yesterday about, and this is similar to the stage setting, that there are different spaces. And I mentioned in the lecture 1008, I think, about we talk about things and we talk about their relationship, but because we don't mention the stage. What stage is it? And we are very, especially when we're not working with it, when we're not engineers, we just say empty space. And we think like it's very clear what we mean by empty space. We say this is the empty space. This is similar to the stage setting that Feyerabend mentioned, empty space. And then we put things there and we have a sort of relationship. If we have two dots, this is, you can ask anyone, 99% will answer the same thing. If you have two dots in empty space, what would be the shortest line in between them?
A straight line.
A straight line. Is it true? No.
There are no straight lines for.
Well, there's no straight lines, but it depends on the space. If you have non-Euclidean space, it will not be a straight line. Look, this is also empty space. Non-Euclidean space is also empty. It's completely empty. It doesn't have anything in it. Then it will be this thing. And in fractality, as you mentioned there already, once you have another solution. So empty space, if you're not working with it, when I mentioned yesterday was that maybe you're a builder and you work in mountainous landscape, maybe Norway, you will be accustomed to using non-Euclidean space when you construct your drawings of a house. But whereas, this of course won't happen, maybe you're working in the Netherlands and everything is flat. And in the end you forget about empty space because everything in the Netherlands is completely flat. This is what happened to people in general. They forget that there are different stages. What type of empty space is very important. And since we don't work with buildings or construction or anything like that, when I sort of relay my information to Kalle Lund here about the objects, for instance this thermos and this coffee cup, I don't tell him. I just talk about relations. There's 1 meter in between them. And this one is situated in XYZ, and this is situated in XYZ. Can Kalle use that information? I would say 99% will say yes, and he cannot. He doesn't know what space I'm talking about. And that is extremely problematic if you go to, well, hey, this is not space. If you're somebody would say, this is no space. The content of the, well, hey, it is. It's an order. The letters come in an order, the words come in an order, sentences come in an order. Yesterday or the day before yesterday, we're talking about taking out something of the order and sort of dissecting it, taking it out of its stage, and then presenting it like not coming from a certain stage as a fact. And I would say to everyone, this is coming from this book. This is going to be true. But I'm not telling in which context it's coming. Which is, this is what we will end up doing with ourselves, our own thinking. So this is not something only between Kalle and me and Kalle and other people and authors and book writers. This will also happen within yourself, indigenous, because you don't tell where a certain thought is emanating, originating. Where is its proper place? And I would say it could be internally disastrous as well. You don't tell the, and of course, reading sentences, meanings, understanding is in space as well, because they are related to each other. How can something be related? These two things are related in space, but also different sentences and different references. They're referring to each other. They are relative pronouns in this book. I'm sorry. And a relative pronoun is reference. It's taking place in space in a very, very obvious sense. And by not thinking of what space, that's going to obscure things. And of course, fractal space is going to add yet another interesting complexity, because then all of a sudden you have different levels. And of course, texts are already using that. When you write a book, you are using fractal space. In the same way, a plant is using fractal space. Why wouldn't it? Why would it sort of hamster its own movement, making it less stable, being less of nature? I challenge you to find such a plant. And I also challenge you to find a book that doesn't use fractal space. So taking something out of its context is a very well-known thing. I think they did that recently when it came to media is constantly doing it. They just present things without an address or an addressee, a location or a direction. All those things are absent in media usually. There was something happening a couple of months ago, 2 months ago. There was this minister. She was the leader of, I know very little of politics. She was leader of a smaller party. Bush, Ebba Bush. That was her name. She was made a scapegoat in the press for some lines she made, and she said something to the effect, according to the newspapers, all of them, that she said it should be deaths in Solna, people should get killed and all that. And the police is not doing their work if people don't get killed. It turns out, many weeks, I was like surprised, and there was no objection within the media. 2 weeks later, somebody presented the whole truth, the whole interview that she made. And they did the same thing as I suggest here. They took the things out of their sequence. In sequence, the meaning was, of course, because meaning is temporality. It is a rhythm. And it was taken out of the rhythm. And when I read it, it didn't have that meaning at all. And the most horrendous thinking is most of the journalists weren't even, I think the first journalist must have been vaguely aware we are really making her horrible. Maybe they weren't aware they didn't like her. She's not one of the most liked politicians, that I know. So maybe they just emotionally projected, and then they cut as they wanted from the text. at least there is one way I can defend that. At least it was some sort of intention. But what Paul Feyerabend is talking about and what Richard E. Lind talks about is something much worse. This is complete randomness. There is no intention here. So these divisions are much worse. At least the journalists didn't like Ebba Busch, and they did it on purpose. So if you find the purpose, if you find the intentions, you can start to understand the whole thing as I did. But here is much harder because there is no intention. Nobody proposed this, it just happened. And I don't think the explanation is bad that Richard E. Lind handed over, that something happened in adolescence and we didn't get support. But especially good, it shows the randomness of how it happened. And that makes it harder, and asking the why question here, or the why question is something I usually say, do ask it. But in this case, it is really damaging, because that's the wrong question. There is no why connected to this. Actually, by not asking the why question, you can get to the proper why question. The directedness, the spiritual path, because if you have greater permanence, you will automatically have a spiritual path. And I think everybody had before. This is what he suggested. He said, not being spiritual is not a thing that didn't exist in the past. And in Eastern traditions, everybody is spiritual, in the way I suggest this autistic way from my point of view, that having permanence over time is spirituality. Of course, it's much more than that, but I wanted to put it down to neurology, and next time we can discuss it in more poetic views. Now, I'm sure if Ian McGilchrist heard this description, he'd be enraged, but I think it served the purpose today to call it just permanence over a longer period will be spirituality to some level, because then you will know that when you were 10 years old, there is a connection to you being 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. There is a directedness, because otherwise you would just be starting over and over again. And is a goldfish spiritual? No, not very much. Yes, time is running out, and I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.